Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Movies That Move We. This is the place where film isn't just entertainment, it's history, it's culture, it's memory. Some episodes that we do are about the movies, commentary, ratings, all of that stuff, but today, this is just about one man. This month we're focusing on Black film history. And today we're going to be profiling Oscar Micheaux. Why is this episode different? This is different, like I said, because there's no reviews, no ranking. We're doing a profile of someone who is very important in Black film history. We're talking about how film history gets made and who gets left out of it. While Hollywood was being built, Oscar Micheaux was already working. He was a writer, director, producer, distributor, promoter. He was independent before independence was ever really a category. Now, one of the movies that I mentioned that we should watch, and it brings context to this conversation, is Titans, The Rise of Hollywood, which you can find on Netflix. So let's talk about it. The start of the American film industry was early 1900s. That was the period of the short film. The industry itself was very tight. And what I mean by that is there were a few men controlling the whole industry. It started in New York. It was in cities like New York and Chicago. And in these cities, there were a group of people who you had to go to for everything. For the film, for camera, for set, for everything. You could only use certain actors and you couldn't use anybody else's actor or producer. It was giving very, what some might call, mob-like. This group that ran everything was called the Trust. And this particular group included Thomas Edison. That Thomas Edison. He controlled production and distribution at the time. In America, he was the one who was making cameras. That was the only person that you could go to. So it made it very difficult for people to be filmmakers, but they did it. And at the point that we have 3 early titans come up, the film industry is shifting from novelty to industry. Power consolidated very quickly. So again, the early titans, Thomas Edison, he controlled the patents, he controlled who could legally make a film. And then you have these 3 players who enter, who their work still stands today. These companies still exist. You have Adolph Zukor. He created Paramount. He was the first one to go with feature-length films, meaning early films were only a few minutes long and they were silent. All you had to read was body language and dramatic gestures. That's what early films were. He created the feature-length film, which was 30 minutes, an hour long. He created the star system. So all of a sudden we have people who are marketed and promoted as this is who you want to be. He's very New York centered early on. More about him later. Carl Laemmle. He opened a theater making movies accessible to the general public. Again, films at this time were a luxury item, novelty. You got dressed up. It was like going to the theater, and only certain people could afford that luxury. But he brought it to the people. And he was one who fought Edison, and one of the people in the industry who was the first to move to California and build Universal City. That was around 1915. William Fox, that Fox, brought vertical integration, meaning he brought the production, the distribution, and the theaters to the system. For him, that was ideal because he did it all, including creating a place to show his films exclusively, whereas everybody else was shopping around to see who would be willing to present their films. Louis B. Mayer, 1/3 of the MGM film company, he brought to the industry the prestige, the glamour. Again, going off of what Lammel also brought to it, all the glitz and the branding power and the razzle dazzle that comes with Hollywood, that we know of in Hollywood. Another person that she isn't mentioned as one of the big three, but she was still influential, and that's Mary Pickford. She was an actress, and she brought her writing skills as well as her acting talents to the industry. So, important clarification that I want to make here is that it wasn't one man that moved Hollywood west. Zukor wasn't the one who led the move to the West Coast. He followed. Lammel and Fox were the first two to move to California. Why California? It was ideal because it offered an escape from Thomas Edison. The weather was ideal. They could film outdoors. They had plenty of landscape to choose from. They had the space, and most importantly, they had control. They didn't have to answer to the trust. They could do their own thing, set their own rules, and they did. Hollywood was built with capital, land, and legal protection. Okay? In short, infrastructure equals power. And in the film industry, they became the power. Just consider for a moment how quickly the industry grew. In just 20 years, it went from those short 5-minute silent reels to feature-length productions with dialogue and razzle-dazzle and music and fanfare. It moved very quickly. One important truth, something to keep in mind, is Hollywood wasn't neutral. It was white, it was male, and it was capital backed. Black presence in the industry was visible, but it was limited. So you saw the servant, the butler, or on the other end of the spectrum, people who were involved in crime and immorality, the stereotypes. Black people weren't missing necessarily, but they were locked out of the system. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. In contrast, you have Oscar Micheaux. He had no studio lot, he had no patents, he had no theater chains, and he didn't have any legal protection. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He was born in 1884. His parents were former slaves. They moved as a part of the Great Migration from Kentucky to the Chicago area, Illinois. His mom was a big fan of Booker T. Washington, and she was in full agreement with what he said about being educated, and of course, this is what she taught her son Oscar about. And so you'll see that in his films, where you have the educated, you have the class differences. You'll see all of that stuff in his films. Again, more about that later. He was one of the early homesteaders when the government was giving away land out west. He went ahead and he put in his bid and he got himself a plot of land in Oklahoma. And he worked the land and he proved to his neighbors, because this was a community, homesteading was a community, not just something you did independently. He proved to his white neighbors around him that he could do this. He did it well. Now, during one hard winter, where he couldn't harvest, couldn't bring in crops or anything like that, and again, that's something everyone in that area was going through at the time, not just him, he sat down and he wrote his first novel called Homesteader. It's not an autobiography, but it is based on his experience. And he went ahead and he self-published that. He went door to door with it. Same thing applied with his films. He wrote his scripts and he self-financed those films. Okay. Lamel escaped Edison. Micheaux escaped Hollywood. He didn't have to avoid it. He didn't have to engage with it either. What did he put on screen? He talked about, as I was mentioning earlier, all of the topics that were important to the Black community at the time, like colorism, passing, tension between the classes, sexual violence, religious hypocrisy, migration, ambition, and moral compromise. Something important to note, his work was not uplift only. It wasn't considered safe or sanitized. He was telling complex stories and centering African American people in these stories. He wasn't trying to comfort white people or play, respectability politics with Black people. He was telling plain truth. This is what life looked like from the Black perspective. He wasn't alone in this pocket of independent film industry. The system for Black filmmakers was fragile. And so you had people out there who were trying to show films, who were making films. Their work, unfortunately, was not preserved. Not all of Oscar Micheaux's work was preserved, but we have more of his films available than we do some of the other players in the industry. Some of those folks were William D. Foster. He was a Black film producer, owner of Lincoln Motion Picture Company. Sherman H. Dudley is another. He started the Black theater circuit and the Black vaudeville circuit, which later became the Theater Owners Booking Association, also known as TOBA. He was key in distribution and getting these things into certain spaces, in Black spaces. Oscar Micheaux's films were played in Black theaters, Black-owned theaters. There weren't a lot of them, but they were played in Black-owned theaters. They were played in segregated theaters. He had the support of churches, lodges, community halls, and roadshow screenings. Another way that his films made it into the community were midnight rambles, which are usually white-owned theaters that would show black films after midnight so that the black and white patrons would never meet, and they didn't have to worry about hearing complaints from white patrons about, oh my gosh, why are these people even in this building? So those things were how his films made it to the masses. Key cities. You hear people talk a lot about the Chitlin Circuit. Well, they focused on, and when I say they, I'm talking about, oh gosh, I just lost the name. Foster and Dudley and Oscar Micheaux and other filmmakers of the time, they focused on distributing their films in places like Chicago, Harlem, New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City, the great migration cities, because that's where we were coming from, but that's where we were going to when we were moving from the South. There were some spaces where they did show films, these black films, in the South, but of course they had to be very careful about that. Hollywood asked, how do we control the market? Oscar Micheaux asked, who already has a screen? Actors and impact. He started a lot of careers, and I wish I wrote down the names of some of them, but one of the most notable, most recognized is Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson, he was a football player. Of course, if you've ever heard of him, he had a magnificent singing voice. He acted in Oscar Micheaux's film Body and Soul, 1925. It was a dual role, so he played both a preacher and a con man in this film about moral complexity. Does that sound familiar? Sinners? Anybody? Yeah, he did it first before Michael B. Jordan. Why does this matter? Again, this story challenged stereotypes. It addressed themes of race, morality, struggles of the black community, and of course it did it from the black perspective. Black audience, what did he make possible with this? Why did this film matter so much? Because his films, and he did over 40 in his career, trained the expectations of the black community, what they should expect from black stardom. It normalized seeing black people on film. And again, not being the stereotype, but being professionals, not living in a shack somewhere, but living in the big city and having careers and things like that. Think about actors and actresses like Lena Horne, Dorothy Dandridge, and Harry Belafonte. They were some of the folks that took on complex roles later on in black film history. He didn't launch their careers, but he did make them possible by laying the groundwork. How many films are left? A lot of his films are lost. Like I mentioned, I think he did 44 films in his career. And this right here is what's left of his film collection. I believe this is 15 of his films. Within Our Gates is one. I did watch that one. It's actually very good. This was done in 1920 and it's 73 minutes long, but that one again covers those themes of migration, and actually one of the things that he focused on in that film was a woman's ability to choose and move freely. So if you haven't, get this collection. check that film out. But again, his films really spoke to the community, okay? And when you think about how come so many of his films were lost, how come we don't have any of Dudley or Foster's work, it's not because they didn't matter. It's because preservation follows power. Think of it this way. How many films can you think of that are, when their titles are called, it's like, oh yes, this is pinnacle great film. This goes down in film history. This is a must-see film. This is, definitely something that framed or shaped culture. Those films are protected, and I'm pretty sure if you start running them back in your mind, when I hear it, I think of like the Woody Allen films, Martin Scorsese films. People will hold those in high standards. Those films by those writer, directors, producers will be upheld and preserved. We'll have them forever. They're protected, they're preserved, and they're celebrated. Film history isn't neutral, it's curated. Just kind of let that sit with you for a minute. Even though Oscar Micheaux doesn't get mentioned as much in film conversations, there are many beneficiaries of the road that he built. Again, think about Ava DuVernay, Issa Rae, Jordan Peele. They all have ownership, archives of their own work. They've done things like they build on smaller platforms first and then present, like Issa Rae. She started with Awkward Black Girl and rolled that into a television series eventually. And you have Jordan Peele, who he has narrative control over his work. He can decide these themes, and even if people don't get it, he's not locked in again to being a stereotypical filmmaker where he can only focus on the hardships of Black life. No, he gets into some real cerebral stuff. Okay, and this is important. He didn't chase Hollywood. He was well aware that they're not going to let me into those gates. I have to create my own path. He built endurance. So with that in mind, and you can share your thoughts on this down in the comments, what does it mean to create when the system isn't built for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. What does it mean to create when the system isn't built for you? Oscar Micheaux in film history is not a footnote. He is the foundation for what we know as the Black film industry now. So tell me, again, share your thoughts on this one. If Oscar Micheaux were alive today, would he join Hollywood? Or do you think he would still continue to build something of his own? Let me know what you think. Okay? One of the things that I keep coming back to with Oscar Micheaux is that he didn't want to be validated. He wasn't worried about being on the Paramount Star system. He wasn't looking for the awards. He wanted to talk to his people, and he did that. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for the resources. He didn't wait for history to catch up. He just created. And that's what we do here at Movies That Move We. That's what we're really about. The stories that move us. Because they remind us of what is possible. So, thank you for joining me and spending time with me today. If this episode moved you, Share it with someone who loves film history. And, don't forget to share, follow, subscribe to our pages on YouTube and Facebook. You can find us at Movies That Move We. I'm Nikkei. This has been Movies That Move We, and we'll see you next time. Bye.